Well, let's get some analysis now on the Russia-Africa Summit with Senior Research Fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Fakude. Mr. Fakude, very good evening to you. Always a pleasure to have you on Newzroom Afrika. So Vladimir Putin then at the summit today committing to providing these grains to about 6 African countries, including Zimbabwe, Mali as well, Somalia, Central African Republic, Burkina Faso. Is that a sign that Africa has a trustworthy ally in the Russian president?
Well, I don't think so. About 3 of those countries that you mentioned are currently benefiting from the services of the Wagner Group, which is the mercenary group that is owned and directed by Vladimir Putin. So this doesn't really indicate anything much. We've seen him cancelling the grain deal, which benefited not only African countries but other parts of the world. And over and above that, he went to bomb the storage facilities of the grain in Odessa in Ukraine. So it really doesn't mean much. I think to an extent it actually angered President Ramaphosa, who went last month to promote peace, but at the same time to try and ensure that the grain was going to be flowing to the African countries, and Vladimir Putin disappointed him by cancelling that deal and further destroying the depository facilities of the grain in Ukraine.
I wonder, though, if the deal on the issue of grain and fertilizers was not always going to be more successful, shall we say, if Putin had commitments directly with the likes of the African countries versus what was negotiated by the United Nations and indeed Turkey.
Well, it's said that, of course, the grain deal is presented as if it was only going to benefit Africans, but it's going to benefit much more than African countries. There are many other countries that are going to be benefiting from this. But the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa led the delegation of 7 nations to both Ukraine and Russia with the aim of trying to achieve some semblance of peace, but importantly to guarantee the grain deal, and you have Vladimir Putin days before cancelling that, it must be a very upsetting time for Cyril Ramaphosa. But importantly, Cyril Ramaphosa is there with Jacob Zuma, who's currently hosted by the same president.
And you mentioned earlier the issue of the Wagner Group. We know there's been a major fallout in recent weeks between Vladimir Putin and the leader of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, who basically tried to mount a mutiny. It was what has been described as the fiercest challenge to Putin's governance in Russia. At the moment, there are Wagner mercenaries deployed in various parts of the African continent. Is there really a future for them in Russia's security cooperation with Africa when you consider that relations between Putin and Prigozhin are no longer where they were, let's say, 6 months ago or a year ago?
Well, the fact that Vladimir Putin has admitted to controlling and owning the Wagner Group, the fact that he tried to fire Prigozhin tells you that he owns and has got control of the Wagner Group. He's the one who's going to henceforth redelegate responsibilities in terms of who's going to be the new leader of the Wagner Group. And the Wagner Group is essential for him in terms of doing the data work that it's been doing in Africa. As you know, the Russian Federation can't do certain things that the Wagner Group has done. So the Wagner Group will continue because it's big business in Africa at the moment. Yesterday we heard about the attempted coup in Niger. You are likely to have the Wagner Group growing there, presenting and selling its services. So the more we see instability in Africa, is the more we're going to see the Wagner Group. And I don't think at this point in time we're going to have a Vladimir Putin who would like to get rid of the Wagner Group. Instead, the business is booming for the Wagner Group. They continue to assist Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So I don't see any reason why he will try and scale back in terms of the Wagner Group's involvement in Africa.
What then becomes the role of South Africa in the broader security negotiations with the Russians? How much would the two be able to offer each other, given how controversial just the joint military drills around February, when it was the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, were?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think Cyril Ramaphosa, one of the things, and other African countries, one of the things that they need to raise very strongly with Vladimir Putin is the role of the Wagner Group in Africa. The Wagner Group currently thrives on instability. And the more we have coups and attempted coups in Africa, is the more their services are required. We know that countries such as Mali, Central African Republic, are actually, at the moment, surviving because of the Wagner Group. They've continued to contract the services of the Wagner Group because of the threats of Al-Qaeda and other militants in those countries. So you have more and more countries that are facing instability, and the Wagner Group is likely to render those services in Africa, and I don't think anyone will stop them from doing so. But of course, the biggest threat is that they are likely to be part and parcel of that disrupting platform in Africa.
Briefly then, Putin spoke of an AU, African Union seat, as part of the G20 by September. Is that realistic when you consider how many of his European foes form part of the G20?
Well, it's not breaking news. It was first raised by Joe Biden, who hinted that, or moved that the African Union must be part and parcel, a permanent part of the G20. So it's not breaking news. But of course, it's bad news for Cyril Ramaphosa, who's been the only African blue-eyed boy within the G20. Now he's going to have to compete with the AU. And other people, of course, have said that this was because when Joe Biden raised this issue, it was because of the dissatisfaction of Joe Biden and Americans and Europeans of Cyril Ramaphosa's role in Africa when he was moving closer to the Russians. So it's not breaking news. This was already muted long time ago by Joe Biden.
Thembisa, Fakude, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.